Hello, my name is Alicia Ramirez, and on behalf of the Los Angeles Public Library, welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for Introduction to Estate Planning. This workshop is the last in a series of programs for Financial Planning Week, which was made possible with the help of the Financial Planning Association of Los Angeles. On behalf of the library, I'd like to thank all of our financial planning volunteers for their participation. Right now, there is still time to get on the wait list to have a private telephone consultation with a certified financial planner to discuss your personal finance questions. This is a pro bono service offered by the Financial Planning Association of Los Angeles, and consultations are completely free with no strings attached. To join the wait list and speak with the certified financial planner tomorrow, visit lapl.org/financial-planning right now. And a few last housekeeping items before we begin. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation, but there will be an official Q&A at the end. Also, this is a publicly viewable streaming program, so when you are chatting in the chat box or asking a question, make sure you do not disclose any private information. If you have more specific questions, consider adding your name to the wait list for one of Saturday's one-on-one consultations. And again, the website for that is lapl.org/financial-planning. And now, before we start our workshop, I'd like to introduce a very special guest. Los Angeles Controller Ron Galperin is the taxpayer's watchdog at City Hall, making sure public dollars are spent efficiently and effectively. He is also the elected paymaster, auditor, and chief accounting officer for the Los Angeles City. Galperin oversees a team that conducts independent audits, manages city payroll and spending, prepares financial reports, pursues fraud and waste, and works to create a more transparent and accountable city for everyone. His reports are improving street maintenance, arts funding, management of special funds, LA's trees, emergency services, and many other city functions. And without any further ado, Los Angeles City Controller Ron Galperin.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for that introduction, Alicia. As was mentioned, I'm the Los Angeles City Controller, Ron Galperin, and I am the elected watchdog for the people's money in the city of Los Angeles. I really wanted to thank Amy Bourne for inviting me today. Thank you, Alicia, for all that you're doing, heading up the Lifelong Learning Division of the Public Library. And indeed, learning is a lifelong process. There's always more to know and more to understand and more to learn. And our libraries in Los Angeles are incredible resources. Our librarians, the professional staff that we have at the library, I could not be more proud of all of you. So thank you so much. As controller, I make sure that public dollars are being put to good use by keeping our government honest and responsive and responsible and accountable. And people deserve to know, we all deserve to know, that the money that we pay to our city is being put to good use. And while it's important for the city to plan how to use its money well, and the city, just like so many people in Los Angeles right now, is having a bit of a tough time because of all of the businesses that have suffered during this COVID pandemic. But it's very important that we use our money wisely, that we make good investments, and it's equally important that the same be the case for each and every single one of you, because we can't have a strong city government if we don't have strong people in our city who are doing well. And that's why I love these workshops and why financial literacy and planning is so crucial and necessary for each and every single one of us. And it's about being able to afford rent, to save up for a car or a house, to plan for trips or vacations, or to increase our education or that of our children. And what you're doing is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to yourself and to your families and to the community by learning how to strengthen yourself financially. I wanted to very much thank today's volunteers and the certified financial planners who have given of their time. And lastly, I want to call your attention on my website at the Controller's Office. If you go to lacontroller.org and do /financial first aid kit, you will find a first aid kit for how to prepare for a financial emergency. We all know about having earthquake kits, right? Well, this is the equivalent, but it's for our finances. So I wish you a great evening as you conclude this week of amazing programming. And thank you so much for all that you are doing in enriching yourself with knowledge. And again, thank you so much to our library, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much to our LA City Controller, Ron, for coming on today and really speaking to the importance of our financial lives as city, as well as all of us individually here. We wanted to take a moment today to really talk about some of the estate planning essentials. What are they? Why are they important? We've all heard some of these terms. Oh, we should have a will. We should look into a trust. But what does it really mean, and why does it really matter? And is it accessible? That's always a question we want to address as well. Before we get started, just quick disclaimer. I am a certified financial planner. I am not an attorney, so please take anything you hear here with just a grain of salt, and be sure to contact a qualified licensed state attorney if you do have specific questions related to your situation. We really want to go through some of these essential parts to introduce you to these topics and just share a little bit of knowledge about why it's such a crucial part of your overall financial plan. And as a quick side before we jump in, another thank you so much to LA Public Library for being incredible partners with us as we transition this into this new virtual format, and still wanted to make sure we had Financial Planning Day, Financial Planning Week for all of our LA community that's been especially hit hard this year. So thank you so much for your partnership. We are absolutely excited. All of our volunteers can't wait for our one-on-one consultations tomorrow. And as Alicia mentioned, if you don't have an appointment yet, we'll put the link up in the chat. We are taking a wait list, but we're going to do our best to accommodate as many people who are interested as possible. And with that, we will get started. So on behalf of the Financial Planning Association of Los Angeles, let's talk about introduction to estate planning. All right, so today what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about some of those key elements of estate planning, how it's an essential part of your overall financial plan and the financial planning profession, as well as some basic estate planning tools for you to learn more about. Before we get started, let me ask you a couple of quick questions. You're welcome to jump into the chat if you have responses. And also too, we will pause once during the presentation just to make sure you're having a chance to get those questions in the chat. We do have one of our other certified financial planners behind the scenes who is available to answer some of the questions live. So thank you again for your participation today. And here we go. So have you ignored planning for retirement? Or have you postponed saving for college if your kids are approaching, or you're actually about to enter college yourself? Have you put off estate planning? If you have waited on any of these topics, why have you procrastinated? Well, let's have a quick discussion about that as we get started here. So just to kick us off, according to care.com, what percentage of adult Americans have a will or a living trust? I'll pause for just a few seconds if anyone has any thoughts, and we'll quickly move on in just a moment. But think, so we've heard it's important, but how many people in the US do you think actually have a will or a living trust already created? If you answered 32%, you would be right. According to a new survey done in 2020 by caring.com, it actually found 32% of Americans do have a will or living trust, but that's actually a 25% decrease in the number of people who have a will or a similar document since 2017. Why do we suppose that people are putting off estate planning? It could be a lack of education about what this means. There could be concerns about the cost of creating some of these different these different tools. So let's dive in more to some of the details. Let's look at some reasons. A lot of people feel that they don't necessarily have an estate. What does an estate actually mean? And is it really necessary? Would we have this view that an estate means tons of money, millions and millions of dollars, and that's just only who some of this estate planning is applicable for? And that's actually not the case. We'll cover a lot of the reasons why it's important for everyone to consider as an important part of protecting your family. Another reason, there could be some family issues. It sounds really complex. Maybe there's just too much complexity. Again, maybe there's a high cost, and a lot of us, frankly, don't really want to think about what that means if we have to prepare this document and kind of confronting that topic of our death. It's not always the most fun topic to think about. But estate planning, what is estate planning? It really involves taking an inventory of your assets and deciding who's going to benefit from them after your death. Just like any other inventories, an evaluation of your estate is a snapshot at a particular point in time. It will change as you add or sell certain assets. It also, the same is true if you get married or get a divorce or you have a child or a second child, anything like that, or you were to inherit some additional wealth. So including also involvement with charities. So a lot of these different facets that you see on the screen here actually come into play when we talk about this topic of estate planning. So what are the real benefits? Why does it matter? Why are we here today listening to this workshop? A big focus is, of course, on what is going to happen to those assets? Who will receive them? Who do you want to receive them after you were to pass? You can also benefit and enrich chosen heirs. You can choose to select certain people that you want to be able to have and carry on that legacy of, whether it's that asset, that home, that item that you love. Also, you can use that to benefit different causes and charities. That's a lot of what we see with charitable giving comes when through someone's estate and their estate plan. A big part we'll talk about in a minute is actually minimizing probate. We'll discuss what the probate process is and why it's important to have an understanding of what this means for your future beneficiaries. And a big thing too that's not as much applicable today, but it can also reduce taxes. Some proactive planning can reduce taxes for those who are going to hit above that maximum exemption from the federal government. So, okay, we've talked about this, it's important, but what actually happens if you don't? Is it a big deal if you don't have an estate plan lined up? The biggest part, and the reason this is so important, is the state actually determines who will receive your assets in the event of your death. Without any plan or a will or a trust, you actually don't have control over what happens. And as a result, some heirs that you might have wanted to include could be left out of or shortchanged from receiving anything from your estate. The probate process can be lengthy and it can be costly. There is a kind of a set fee that's charged. It does have to go through the courts. As a result of the probate process too, everything that goes through probate becomes a matter of public record. So a lot of people do choose to try to avoid probate for the privacy protection of not having all of their affairs, as it were, available for public viewing and part of the public record. And with this, the estate can also pay potentially higher taxes if it does go through probate as well. And then the most important one truly is, the last thing we want to see is a family dispute occur because of family members are arguing or fighting over particular assets, and they felt, no, that was promised to me and this was promised to me. So that's the last thing we want to see ever happen after you were to pass. We want to keep your family as cohesive as possible. So we'll quickly touch on each one of those items. When we talk about federal estate taxes, you'll notice the benefit is that saving a lot in taxes was not at the top of my list necessarily. While taxes are an important consideration, taxes alone should not be the reason we create and the reason you make an estate plan. The state tax laws absolutely can and do change. As you can see on the graph here, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, that essentially doubled the amount that could be excluded from someone's federal estate tax. But again, that is already set to sunset in 2025, if not sooner. So that can come back into play, which is a reason why it's important every 5-10 years or so, if not more frequently, to revisit your plan, make sure it's still appropriate and applicable to you, and keep an eye on those changing estate laws and tax laws. The exclusion amount currently for those gifts is $11.58 million. Not something a lot of us are thinking we have to worry about, but again, we will likely see this come down in the coming years. All right, so we've talked about this estate planning process. We've talked about the importance of it. How do you actually go about doing it? Where do you even start? Just like with any process in financial planning, we want to start out thinking about what are my goals? What are my priorities? What is my intention with what I'm about to create? Is it to protect my family? Is it for certain other reasons? What's the most important piece to me? Evaluate your situation and then start to develop a plan around that. Your plan should be tailored to really what matters most to you to accomplish your goals. And that, frankly, is what financial planning is all about. What matters most to you? Let's find a way to get you there. Step 4, take action. And like we mentioned with step 5, every once in a while, monitor and adjust your plan to make sure it's still accurate and appropriate given the time that's passed. So a bit more about each one of those steps. Step 1, let's set some goals. The order of importance is going to vary from person to person, just like it would from situation to situation. If you're the parent of young children, protecting your children, providing for your spouse is probably one of your top priorities and the reasons you'd want to think about creating your estate plan. You might want to also think about setting aside enough money, maybe to help pay for a child's education or college. Or if you're remarried, one of the goals might be to leave an inheritance to your children from a first marriage. If you have a child with special needs, providing for his or her needs may be at the very top of your list to make sure that they're okay in future years after you're no longer here. On the other hand, your primary commitment might be to benefit other relatives, friends, or even charities. And you want to make sure that a cause that's important to you is receiving a benefit from your estate. These are all reasons to think about when you're approaching that estate plan. What's that first priority? What do I want to start with? Step 2, as we mentioned, evaluate your situation. So take that inventory. Determine your assets and also your debt. So your net worth that you hear people talk about net worth is really all your total assets, whether it's your house, cars, your savings account, your retirement accounts, collectibles, anything like that you own, minus any debts like a mortgage or a car loan or your student loans. And that minus the debts is your net worth. So evaluate your current net worth to see if you would be in that realm where you're concerned about potential estate taxes. A couple special situations we just highlighted a moment ago are really talking about children from a previous marriage, children with special needs, if you own a business, and as well as some of those family collectibles. So really quickly on each one of these to touch a little bit more on them. Children from a previous marriage, a lot of parents really are concerned that maybe after they were to pass, their assets might go to their current spouse, who might then choose not to take care of their children with their estate according to their wishes. That's a common thing we see very frequently, and it's a reason why a lot of families that have children from previous marriages end up creating a trust, which we'll talk about in a bit. Also, like we mentioned, special needs children. There are different types of trusts we can create in order to help provide for our special needs children without removing them from being eligible for federal benefits. And 2, if you own a small business or someone in your family owns a small business, that transferring that ownership can actually be quite difficult if it were to go through probate or through a will. It's important to think through what that look like for your beneficiaries who would be inheriting that business. What if they don't want to run the business? What if they don't have the money to keep it going, how are they going to be able to continue on if they still have this asset? So a lot of these things you want to think through. For developing our plan in step 3, always would want to have you consult a financial professional and or a legal professional as well. There are certainly specific legal requirements, and they absolutely do vary state by state. And for talking with your financial professional or reaching out to one for a consultation, you want to get the big picture of your overall plan, your overall financial situation. It's not just about, I need to create a will and that's it. We want to understand what else is going on in your financial life, because so many of these different pieces, they don't sit separately. They're not apples and oranges. They really do interplay and interact with each other. So it's important for your professionals to understand your full situation. And then also evaluate those estate planning tools. How do they work? What are the different tools available? And what really is going to work best for you based on those goals you started out with from the get-go? So to touch more on the specific tools that we'll go through one by one here, you have some of these main, prominently 4 key tenets of estate planning. We have all heard about wills. We have heard about trusts as well. We'll also talk about 2 different other items, these durable power of attorneys and these living wills or healthcare directives. These are really meant to protect you in the case of incapacity. If any of us have ever had a family member who's had a fall and they are unconscious or something medically has occurred, and unless there is some of these documents are in place, there's actually it's not very clear that their wishes are going to be followed. So it's all about planning ahead of time. So if anything were to happen, you've already thought it through, and then we know that your family will be able to follow your wishes. So talking about the will, to get us started, the one we're probably most familiar with, a will is a legal document that details where you want your estate's assets to go after your debts and any outstanding debts are paid. Almost everyone should have a will, and most experts recommend that you hire an attorney to help write your will. For one reason, state laws will vary in regards to wills, and an attorney can advise you on these differences. There can be quite significant differences between state to state, so it's certainly important to consult a legal professional. It's also important to have your will reviewed and modified as necessary if you move to another state, because again, those rules will change. A will lists your heirs and the different requests you're making, and it has it all structured, so it's all written out ahead of time. It also helps to name a personal representative or an executor, the person who is going to handle your assets and make sure it's followed according to your will after you pass. And it also, frankly, most importantly, helps to identify a guardian for minor children. Scary point, scary fact, the state actually decides who takes custody of your children if you have minors at home and you were to pass. Granted, a lot of the time that'll go to a close family member, but this is why it's so crucial, regardless of our assets and the net worth we talk about, it's so important to have that written out somewhere, particularly if you have younger children at home, just to make sure you know they're going to be in the hands of the family or loved ones or friends that you really know will do the best for them in case you're not here. So what is not in a will? There are a few things. I'll throw this out there, but I know we won't necessarily be able to answer live here, but does anyone know, as a quick quiz, does a will supersede everything else in your estate plan? Let everyone think about that for just a moment. Does a will basically overwrite everything else in your estate plan? The answer from the slide, obviously, is actually no. There are quite a few different types of assets that do not go and are not covered by a will, mainly property ownership. The way your property is titled can supersede your will. So if you are, however that is listed, that will legally overturn what would be written. A lot of people might think, oh, I'm going to leave my house to this child or my kids, but that's not necessarily the case, which is why it's so important to review what is listed for some of these documents to make sure you're clear on who's receiving these different assets. And also some things like your retirement plans. When we create or sign up for a retirement plan, we often have to write down our beneficiary along with their social security number and some of these different pieces in the moment. The reason for that is that also supersedes your will. So let's say you were married 10 years ago to someone else. You have been at the same job for 15 years and you have a 401k or a 403b plan with work, don't really pay too much attention to the statements, and didn't quite realize your ex-spouse might actually be your beneficiary. Regardless of what you would have written elsewhere, that document, that beneficiary designation, absolutely supersedes your will. So whenever we talk about major life events happening, really crucial to go back through some of these documents and make sure you have everything else updated to reflect your current wishes. Another thing too, insurance policies. They do not go within the will itself. And of course, anything that you have sold, given away, or transferred is no longer included. This final point about being transferred to a trust is one I want to touch on for just a moment. When we talk about trusts, and we will talk about them in just a few slides, when you actually are moving assets from your personal assets into and underneath a trust, there are various types of trust vehicles, but oftentimes you're actually transferring the true ownership of that asset into the trust itself. So that also would not be included. If you put your house in a trust, it would not be included in your will, for example. All right, so that living will and healthcare or advanced directive I spoke to for just a moment really is important because it explains to your healthcare professionals as well as your family what your actual wishes are when it comes to end of life care. If something happens and you have to be put on oxygen or anything like that, that will specify, you can actually clarify. Some people have very strong opinions that they do not want to be resuscitated, for example. The reason those are followed is because of that living will or healthcare advanced directive. It's really important that is witnessed. It's usually required to be witnessed by others. Also important to get professional advice. But also too, this is a document where you would potentially want to have that on file, or you'd want your parents, for example, to have that on file with their physician. So if there is a particular wish, their current care providers are aware of that and are able to reference it in case something comes up. A living will, it can be challenged, so it is important to have that very specific language so that attorney should be brought into the process and help review the document. So similarly, but not quite the same, powers of attorney are another thing you maybe have heard of in the past, but there are really those two types. So financial is the main one you might hear and think of. So let's say something happens to a parent. They're unfortunately, they fall, they hit their head, they're not able to make decisions for themselves. Someone needs to be able to step in to help continue to pay the bills, cover the medical bills, and take care of everything else that would have been going on for that parent. That financial power of attorney is crucial, and that's the entire point of it, so that someone can step in, it springs into action, they can step in to start to take over the finances and really help make those decisions in the event of an incapacity, if something happens and someone's not able to make those choices for themselves. And similarly, that healthcare, that living will we just talked about, authorizes those actions on end of life wishes. So to really think about that, it can dictate what actually happens in life or death situations. So it's extremely important. Both of them can be changed or revoked. They are not permanent, but it is absolutely important and crucial when you're thinking about these documents. And these are, again, documents we should all have regardless of our assets and our net worth. It is very important to remember that we want it to be in the hands of someone we trust. They would have full control to make some of these decisions following our wishes, but it is crucial that we feel comfortable that they're going to look out for us and they're going to be capable of making those decisions. It's oftentimes something you'd want to talk about with your family, make sure they're comfortable with that situation. Some family members oftentimes that have been assigned to these have gotten these become the power of attorney in one fashion or another, either don't feel comfortable handling the finances or really don't feel comfortable making those important health decisions for a loved one. So really important to think through who would step in for you to take care of this. Who do you trust to be able to have access to your essential financial accounts and bank accounts in order to if something were to happen to you. So we're talking about trust, and we'll kind of dive in here for a bit. Depending on your goals and the complexity of your estate, you also may benefit from other estate planning tools. A trust is one of those tools. A trust is a legal vehicle for conveying wealth. There are truly over 50 types of trusts. So obviously the type of trust you set up really depends on your needs. But if you are considering a trust, professional assistance is essential. The trust or trustees whom you name when you establish a trust, they manage the assets in the trust for your benefit and or for the benefit of your beneficiaries or anyone that else you name in there. And there are 4 main examples we'll touch on before we move on here. A living trust is probably the most common type we've heard of before. You can set up a living trust to manage your assets while you're living, and it helps to avoid that whole probate process we talked about before after your death. However, this type of trust does not reduce your estate taxes. It's pretty more straightforward than some of the others that are out there. In addition, the benefit of avoiding probate may not be that significant, especially in states that have expedited or simplified the probate process for simple or smaller estates. The point here, the key takeaway is take time to compare the costs and the hassles of probate with the costs and the effort required to set up and administer a living trust. There's also something called an irrevocable trust. If estate taxes are a concern, you could set up an irrevocable trust, meaning that you have assets you put into the trust that are beyond your control. You've essentially wiped your hands of them. You no longer are able to access them directly or dictate how they're spent or used. And therefore, you would most likely be exempt from estate tax on some of those assets. There's also something called a testamentary trust. You could also set up a testamentary trust that would go into effect upon your death to manage your assets for the benefit of your children. In the trust, you name the person or institution who will manage the assets and you specify when the trust will dissolve. So for example, when you have a child reach age 21 or 25, for example, or whatever you would deem appropriate, that you can set that ahead of time and make sure that the trust will dissolve upon that reaching that event or that milestone. Testamentary trusts may also be used as a way to reduce potential estate taxes, but they still may be changed up to the time of death. Unlike the irrevocable trust we just went over a moment ago, the testamentary trust can still be tweaked a bit. The irrevocable, once you've created and you've moved assets into that irrevocable trust, you can no longer take them out. It is a completed official permanent transfer, and you no longer have direct rights into the assets themselves. There's also that special needs trust we mentioned before for if you do have a special needs child or you know a friend or a loved one who has a special needs child. This type of trust allows you to assist a disabled child financially without disqualifying them for government assistance. These trusts can certainly be valuable tools, but truly not everyone needs one. They do cost money to set up and administer, and unlike wills, irrevocable trusts, like we mentioned, cannot be changed. So if you are thinking of, you absolutely want to do something into an irrevocable trust, just remember that you will not be able to change your mind down the line. And in general too, just in case we're getting this question about the cost of setting up a trust or creating a trust, it really does vary. It depends quite a bit on the complexity of your situation, as well as how many assets, meaning a house or rental property, or how many other things you want to be included in there. There's oftentimes there can be a fee for assigning each asset into the trust itself. But in general, fees will vary from, I think some of the lowest I've seen is $1,000 to up to into the tens of thousands, depending on the complexity. But a key point is something like having children from a previous marriage would be a point of complexity. That wouldn't necessarily mean it wouldn't be efficient or effective to get one, or that it would cost too much money, but it is something to consideration. That would be something that you'd certainly want to consider a trust in that case. Also want to talk a bit about gifts when we talk about estate taxes and some of these other items. If estate taxes are a concern, or you think there might be a concern, there is a way other than trust to reduce your liability, the potential tax liability. You can give away your assets while you're still alive. This allows you to benefit recipients of your generosity now when they may really benefit from the gift, and you can actually visibly see them benefit from the gift. Gifting allows you to remove assets from your estate before you were to pass, because you're fully giving it to someone else. While you're being generous, you can take advantage of tax-free options for giving. For example, in 2020, you can give cash or assets valued at up to $15,000 to each person you choose, free of any gift tax. A couple can give away $30,000 a year. The tax-free amount is indexed to inflation and increases from time to time, though it does not increase every year. So let's say that you have a grandchild or a family member that you really want to support. You're able to gift $15,000 to them each year and not actually have to pay any taxes. Gifts above that $15,000, of course, just given the fact that we're talking about this, do actually incur a gift tax. It requires filing a gift tax return and making sure your accountant has that for tax purposes as well. You can also give an unlimited amount to a charity or to your spouse free of gift tax, provided he or she is a US citizen. If your spouse is not a US citizen, the tax-free gift amount in 2020 is $157,000. This amount is also indexed for inflation. You can't pay the tuition bill or medicals of a loved one without having to pay this gift tax, as long as you pay the money directly to the institution rather than giving it to the person who will benefit and letting him or her pay the bill. So for example, if you wanted to assist your mother with some bills related to her health, if you pay them, you would want to pay the actual medical facility physician's bill or whatever it might be directly, rather than writing her a check for the money. If you write her a check, that counts as a gift that has to be calculated each year. Same thing again with that example with education. If you wanted to assist with education for your child or for someone else, you pay the institution directly rather than writing them a check. It's an important, it's simple, but it's important to remember because it can make a difference in the long run. Just make sure you know you won't need the money, actually, of course, before you give it away. So we talk about taking action. What does that look like? You want to choose the tools you'll use. When you calculated your net worth and you reviewed the tools you have available to meet those estate planning goals, it is actually time to put that plan into action. So choose those tools. Decide on heirs, the executor, the trustee. Who do you want to give your assets to? Who do you feel comfortable to oversee the disposition of those assets that you know is capable of following your instructions and making sure your beneficiaries do receive those assets? This is also the time to execute those required documents. Make sure you get everything completed, because just because you create a trust account, if you actually don't fund the trust, you wanted to have your house in a trust for certain reasons. If you don't actually move that title, move the asset into underneath, like as to be an asset of the trust, it actually has never taken place and that asset is not protected. So it is required to complete that execution in order to do that too. Sometimes it's necessary to buy insurance, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And also, of course, important to communicate your intentions. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. But you'd want your family and your beneficiaries, or whoever you choose to bequeath your assets to, you want them to have an understanding of what things look like and why they're important in the way that you've structured things, so they're not caught by surprise in the event of something occurring and happening to you. So talking about insurance, we're all familiar with the different types of insurance, whether it's our car insurance or home insurance. There's another reason these are really important too as well. Insurance is another tool we can use that serves several purposes in estate planning. The liability, homeowners, and auto insurance can protect your assets, your estate assets, from a catastrophic loss or lawsuits. Life insurance can cover the beneficiary's everyday needs, and it can provide an inheritance for individuals or for charities. It can also permit a business buyout. We talked about if you own a small business, what happens if the beneficiaries inheriting it don't necessarily want to run the business? How do they actually cash in on the value that you created with your business if they have this asset they don't know what to do with? That's where sometimes these life insurance policies come into play, so that you do have your beneficiaries have a means in order to facilitate anything with that business. And it can also, it may in fact be essential if you have a buy-sell agreement. That's something related to the business with insurance as well, to have that in place. Life insurance proceeds can also be used to pay taxes and other estate settlement expenses. One important point as well I should mention about probate. Because the probate process does have to go through our court system, it can really take, frankly, months, if not longer, to completely settle an estate. A key part about that is your assets are actually somewhat frozen in time until your final estate can be settled. So what that means, if you had bills to pay, like a mortgage that's still ongoing, or there were quite a bit of funeral expenses or anything of that nature, or something else that's a financial ongoing concern, your beneficiaries wouldn't necessarily be able to access it. Anything that's gone through probate, they can't directly access in order to cover those bills. So another reason it's so crucial to think through this process, because you don't want your heirs to be stuck where they're scrambling to try to cover expenses because everything there was not these documents in place and everything had to go through the probate process. As with other forms of property, pay attention to how life insurance is owned. For example, if you own it, the proceeds will be part of your taxable estate. This is for a life insurance policy. On the other hand, if another person, such as your spouse or an irrevocable trust, owns the insurance policy, the proceeds generally will not be included in your estate tax for tax purposes. So it's one of those areas where life insurance can be used in conjunction with estate planning to try to assist in reducing estate taxes, but also help plan so that everything's already been worked out ahead of time. And touching on this again, importance of communicating. Really crucial to talk to your heirs. While it may feel uncomfortable, discuss your estate plan in advance with your heirs. Doing this can help dissolve any potential future conflicts. It can reduce feelings of guilt as well, and all of the other emotions that accompany this sensitive topic. It's difficult to do, but it's certainly important. Sometimes people have an estate plan, but it's a big secret. And why do we think that is? Maybe they're uncomfortable talking about it. They're uncomfortable facing the thought of dying, understandably so. In the experience of financial planners, we have found that secrecy is often not the best policy. Surprises often can cause even more conflict and upset a lot of your heirs. And sometimes these conflicts spill over into court and actually can destroy the owner's original intent and really hurt family relationships in the long run, which is the last thing we want to avoid. So we suggest a 3-step approach. Talk to your heirs. Write them a letter of instructions so they have, and this is not an official document, but write them a letter of instructions so they understand where you're coming from. They understand maybe some of the items in your estate and why you made the decisions you did. That also could include where things are stored. Are they in a safety deposit box and some of these other tools? We want to have those documents organized. Similarly to what the city controller was talking about too, it's important to have that plan and these items in place ahead of time just to prepare. And then of course, discuss those wishes with your executor, the trustee, or those that have those power of attorneys, that financial power of attorney, or that healthcare living the advanced directive or power of attorney as well. So they understand what your wishes are, and they're not trying to figure out after something happens to you how you would have wanted them to handle something. That's the last thing they want to feel uncomfortable because they're not sure what your wishes are. And myself, and I think pretty much any planner that you may speak with tomorrow, if you're joining us, can certainly relate to those situations where we've talked with the younger children. They're really concerned they're not meeting their parents' wishes. So talking about that letter of instruction just a moment more, it does clarify those final wishes and can help resolve some of those outstanding issues. Include items like those final wishes, like the type of funeral or service you would prefer, perhaps the obituary you would like to have published. I know it feels really strange to think about that and to actually jot that down on paper, but it is important to know rather than your family having to guess after the fact. Where can those heirs find those relevant documents we just talked about? It helps to include a financial statement listing your different accounts, listing their retirement plans, any insurance policies, and any outstanding loans. If you have a lockbox, include the key and location, the safety deposit box, and make sure that's written out so people know where to find it. And if it's something that's stored digitally, like our passwords and usernames, it's another thing that's coming up more frequently of late. Try to have that consolidated in one place that some of your family know about, or some of your heirs or trustees, potential trustees would know about, so they can access something in the event of something occurring. I've myself with the client or two have certainly come across where something happened unexpectedly and the children were extremely stressed and scrambling, trying to figure out what to do and where everything is. And it creates a lot of pressure on the family when you already have something else that's going on that's even more important with health. So really think through that and make sure everyone knows where it is. And then step 5, of course, is to monitor and adjust your plan. Update those wills and trusts when major life events occur, a birth, a death, a divorce. And as we wrap up, let me remind you that an estate plan, it's never truly done. Review and update your will and sometimes a trust when that family situation does change. Similarly, if your financial situation changes because you've received a major promotion or an inheritance, or you've started a business, updates may also be required. And don't ignore the possibility that your intentions might change for a variety of reasons. Update your estate plan periodically as well to make sure it stays current with legal changes and any new tax law changes. You may want to add tools like a trust that weren't necessary before, that very likely might come into play down the line for many of us watching the workshop today. And keep that big picture perspective. Estate planning is truly a part of a broad financial plan that's designed to help you achieve your goals while you're alive and also after your death. And let's see here. Want to touch, of course, about working with a financial planner, talking about who we are and what we do. Financial planners really focus on that big picture perspective. As you put that estate plan into action, a planner can be a valuable member of your team. They can help you weigh the various strategies and select the best choices for your situation. The key part being for your situation. What works for a friend or a neighbor might not be the most appropriate thing for you. So to begin, a financial planner takes that big picture approach and makes sure that your estate plan coordinates with the other elements of your overall financial plan, such as investing and education planning and retirement planning, all of which we talked about other workshops today, this week, and tax planning. A financial planner provides personalized advice based on a thorough understanding of your personal situation and experience in estate planning. And they can provide referrals to other trusts and estate attorneys who can assist you in the preparation of these necessary documents. They can also let you know when things are coming down the line that are going to make changes or make you want to potentially review what you've already created because the laws have changed as well. The point overall, though, is that financial planning includes estate planning, and it's really a process. It's not a product, and it's really meant to be tailored to what matters most to you and your situation and your family. And if you are, thank you so much for your attention today. We'll open it up in just a moment for other questions that have come up since. If you are looking for more information about any financial planners, you can always visit plannersearch.org. It lists a number of different planners, and you can search by geographic area, the types of clients serve, any specialties they might have. And it's quite a bit in there too, as well as some other links to resources too. And make sure too, an important point is check the planner's designations. You'll see for my name, I have a CFP, that Certified Financial Planner. This certification assures you that the planner meets professional standards for education and experience and is held to a high standard of ethical conduct. There's oftentimes an alphabet soup of different designations you'll see after people's names in the side of the business. So it's important to really understand what that qualification means. And finally, absolutely interview several people, several planners. Ask about their experience in estate planning, find out how they educate themselves about new laws, and make sure it's a good fit for you, that you feel heard by them and that you feel they understand your situation. And we certainly appreciate you joining us for this workshop today. Really enjoyed talking with you and appreciate your attentiveness in this virtual live stream format. We hope you learned something that will help you as you start working on or creating and updating your estate plan. And if you have any questions, we'll open it up in just a moment. And we certainly hope we'll see some of you tomorrow for those one-on-ones where you can ask your planner any direct questions that apply to you. Okay. I will read. So two-part question about moving out of state. One, for the will and healthcare directive, you said state laws vary. Does this mean that they have to be redone when you move? That's a great question. And frankly, they can. It's truly one of those areas where you'd want to talk and consult with an attorney that's licensed in that state, because the rules are governed by the state laws. Anything related to how things happen within probate or anywhere else, if there are inheritance taxes, anything like that is handled by the state itself. And you'd really want to make sure you're consulting a legal professional that can let you know if you do need to make an update to any of your documents. A good question. So do state laws vary for the trust, or will be okay in a new state? There are certainly a couple things to think about when it comes to a trust. And that's actually a fantastic question. Part of what is a big difference in between some of the different states that we live in is how they handle kind of marital property. So some states like California are community property states where your spouse is entitled to a portion of your estate just by the nature of you being married. There are certainly some variations in there. And then there are also other states where that's not the case. And if your husband owned the house before you got together and then you've both lived there, technically that asset might still be in the husband's name in that example. So it does matter, and it can make a difference on who is handling, how the trust is actually handling that. In general, the trust rules are pretty universal, but they're still completed by an attorney within a particular state. So it's still one of those areas you'd still want to have looked at in case, just to make sure everything is still up to date. All right, I think that might be it for us. So we will leave it at that. We absolutely thank you for your attention and really appreciate you being with us this evening. As a reminder, all of these workshops for this week have been recorded on LA Public Library's YouTube channel and their Facebook channels. So please visit those again if to view the other workshops on investor protection. We talked about investing basics and those investing principles. We also covered education and tuition planning, as well as a great session yesterday on retirement planning too. So we invite you to take a look and visit those again. And thank you so much and have a good night.